welcome back to Sports Broadcasting. We're here with former dean at Bloomsburg University, Dr. Irvin Wright. He also played linebacker at the University of Buffalo and grew up out in Kansas. Also played at Dodge City Community College out in Kansas. So we're gonna do an interview with him. How did you get out from Kansas to play at Buffalo? What's the story behind that?
Well, first I got to get from Norristown, Pennsylvania, my high school, to Dodge City, Kansas. And that started with my high school football coach. During my senior year, he pulled me aside in January to ask me what I was planning to do after I graduated from Norristown High School. This was in 1964. And I told him that I had several options. My electric shop teacher, Mr. Henry, offered me an opportunity to consider joining the Philadelphia Electrical Union as an apprentice position. And I would have been the first African American to do that in 1964, which really shocked me because the population of persons of color in Philadelphia was very large, and I just couldn't understand. Well, I could understand it, I just didn't ask any questions.
Yeah.
That was one option. The other option, of course, was to go into the service, which a couple of my friends and I had discussed at length and decided that that would be a viable option for us. And of course, the third one would have been to consider applying for a position at the local steel company. I think it was called Allen Steel Company at that point in time. And so after I shared those three options with my high school football coach, he told me that I should consider going. In fact, he told me I should go to college. I could be successful in college. And so we sat down and decided what options were available to me because my grades were not all that outstanding. I've had a number of college recruiters in to talk to me, but after they reviewed my grades, they probably considered other options. And so John Lute was my high school football coach, and he lives over outside of Ashland, Pennsylvania today, around the LaBelle area. Anyway, he sat down with me in his office and we looked at some possible options, and I told him that if possible, I want to go as far away from home as possible, if possible, as possible. And he asked me why, and I said, as a child growing up, I had to wash dishes, scrub floors, and do all the cleaning in the house. Wash dishes every day except Sundays and holidays. And so I kind of wanted to get away from that, get out from underneath my mother's control, so to speak. And so we considered the West Coast, but when we sat down and I looked at the potential for earnings during the summer, with that in mind, we figured out that I could only get home once a year. So I'd go out in August for summer football practice, and I wouldn't get home until after spring semester in May. And so we decided to cut the distance in half, and Dodge City was a viable option. The problem was that they did not offer me the scholarship on site. They said all the players at Dodge City come out first, earn the scholarship. And the scholarship at that was limited to a tuition and book scholarship. At that time, although they do today, they did not have a residential campus. So I said, okay, I'm going to Dodge City, Kansas. Scared to death, but nevertheless, that was an adventure that I look forward to. Got to Dodge City. I'm not going to tell you about all my horror experiences because that would take all night, but I'm just going to tell you, got to Dodge City. A couple of days into practice, I was informed by the head coach that it looked like I'm going to play a lot of football for them. Of course, my head got big, and I went from the first string all the way down to the fourth string. And a week later, I was back up to the first string. And so I earned the tuition and book scholarship. I started for Dodge City Community College for 2 years at linebacker and also offensive guard, if you can believe that, at about 200 pounds. The only thing that saved me was that I was very quick, so many of the linemen, I could beat them to the punch. the punch, and that's why I had a decisive advantage over them. But my career at offensive line was short-lived when I transferred to Buffalo. Now, how did I get to Buffalo? I had been offered several opportunities to go to schools in the Midwest, but after 2 years, I think I had enough of the Midwest. Nice people, beautiful people, but the culture and the environment just was not my cup of tea. I wanted to get back east, and so I called up my high school football coach again, and he said, "Well, I have a friend at Buffalo, and I know some people at Temple." I said, "Whatever you do, no Temple." I did not want to go to Temple for two reasons. Their program was not very good at the time, and it would have placed me in proximity too close to my mother. So I opted for Buffalo. They invited me to campus after I had graduated from Dodge City Community College to spend the day with them, and they put me in shorts, football cleats, and t-shirt, and they just enjoyed themselves all day working me out. And at the end of the day, they offered me a full scholarship. Ironically, that was the time when the airlines were on strike, and so while some airlines were flying, others weren't. I could fly into LaGuardia or JFK and take a train from New York to Philadelphia, and then take a train from Philadelphia back home to Norristown, and that's how I did it. But anyway, they offered me a full scholarship. And middle of August, packed up all my clothes and got on a bus and went to Buffalo. A week before our first football game, they tried me out at different positions. It was clear that I was going to play a linebacker spot, but they wanted to see if I was good at any other spots. And they also tried me on the offensive line. They just beat me to death. So they said, "Get rid of him." No, he's not good there. And so at the first game, I shared the starting position with another player. At the end of the first game, while I was in the shower, the coach came and told me point blank that position was mine for as long as I wanted it. So I started at the position of outside linebacker. We played a front, an 8 front, and I was the strong side linebacker. Actually, I loved the position because it got me in the action at the line of scrimmage, and also got me an opportunity to play defensive back. The way we rotate, we had 3 backs, the safety and 2
Cornerbacks.
Thank you, 2 quarterbacks. And so as we rotated things many times, I ended up in the backfield defending against the pass. I really enjoyed that. College was my opportunity to advance myself personally. And I have to give it to my high school coach. He was absolutely right. I did make it through college. After I graduated from college, excuse me, let me back up a little bit. Spent 2 years at Dodge City Community College and 2 years eligibility at Buffalo. But the problem with Buffalo was that when I transferred my community college credits to Buffalo, they didn't accept all of them. In fact, they made me take some classes over. During the 60s, they did not have articulation agreements between community college. And of course, Buffalo's in New York, and I came from Dodge City Community College. So when I graduated in 1969, it took me 5 years, I had 155 credits as opposed to 128 credits. So I spent a lot of time in college. I only ended up $1,000 in debt at the time when I graduated. So that was quite an adventure. And I was very lucky. The superintendent from the Buffalo Board of Education came to campus and interviewed me along with a number of other education majors. So I'd never really wrote a resume. I never had to write a resume or a letter of application, and never got taught how to do those things. And so I got offered a position with the Buffalo Board of Education as an elementary school teacher. My major was physical education in college, and so I was an elementary phys ed teacher. Did that job for 1 year and absolutely loved it. But fortunately for me again, and I was very lucky, my college football coach contacted me and asked me if I would consider helping out the football program, and they would offer me a grad assistantship to do that. Well, I just jumped at that opportunity. So what that meant was that I would keep my teaching job. After school, I go to campus, help out with the football program, and during the evening hours, go to graduate school. So when they made that offer, they were also in the process of interviewing coaches for a position that they had available. Now, this was in 1970, and it was during the time of student unrest on college campuses. Students were rebelling against the establishment of college campus. Black students in particular were rebelling because of the fact that they had very few faculty of color on campus and very few, if any, faculty administrators. And so what's ironic about the whole situation was that for 38 years, I ran a support program called Act 101 here at Bloomsburg University. And in 1967, my first summer at Buffalo was in 66. My second summer at Buffalo, when we showed up for football camp, they started this special support program similar to Act 101. In New York, in the, it's called the Educational Opportunity Program. Now, New York has several different names for the programs because they have several systems of higher education in New York. But the U.of started in 1967, and I can remember that group of students, and the majority of them were African American black students that reported to campus. Now, what's ironic about that is that it was the students from that group that ended up rebelling on campus and responsible for me being hired. Well, actually I got hired. Well, I'm a little confusing now. Let me back up. They offered me a grad assistantship. They were also interviewing people for a position. They asked me to take the candidate that they interviewed for the assistant football coach out to dinner. So they interviewed 3 of them. So every morning I would report back to the head coaches that I did not like the candidate. You know, because I knew what the program needed and had no idea, any thought in my mind that they would consider me for the position. So after I said I did not like the third candidate, they all said, "We agree, do you want the job?" So that's how I got hired as an assistant football coach. Little, if any, none coaching experience. I got hired, and so they put me with the freshman team. And back then, we had freshman football programs. We had freshman football programs, and then we had the upper class football program, sophomore, juniors, and seniors. That lasted for 1 semester. That was a great experience for me. But in January 11th, 1971, the state of New York dropped the football program at Buffalo, just like dropped the football program. And rationale for that was because of the amount of money that they had invested in the program, and at that time, they were looking for more ways to spread the money out more equally among all the programs and all the students. And so that's why they dropped the football program. So that was January 11th. February 1st, I got hired at the University of Toledo as a full-time assistant football coach. responsible for coaching the linebackers. Now, a whole lot of things happened between that time to make that happen, none of which I had any clue of. It's just that I talked to someone at the National Coaches Convention in Houston, Texas. He happened to have been, at the time, he was an assistant football coach at Ohio State. And another assistant coach interviewed at the University of Toledo, and they wanted to know if he knew of anyone that was out there, a person of color, that might be a likely candidate at the University of Toledo. And that's how my name got introduced to the University of Toledo. And so the head coach at Buffalo called me up and said, Irvin, called me into the office, said, Irvin, just got a call from the head coach at the University of Toledo. He's interested in interviewing you. This is 2 weeks now. He's interested in interviewing me. So he gave me his telephone number. I called. We talked on the telephone. This was a Thursday. And then, he flew me to Toledo on a Saturday, interviewed me Saturday, flew me back to Buffalo, called me up Sunday, hired me, and I started on February 1st, which was the following Tuesday. And so I was, my first year at the University of Toledo, we went undefeated. Prior to that, they had won 24 games. Back then, the big deal for the MAC conference, the Mid-American Football Conference, was the Tangerine Bowl in Orlando, Florida. I think it kind of evolved into the Citrus Bowl today. And I think they either really renovated the old stadium or they built a new one. I'm just not quite sure, because that was in 1971 when we won the Mid-American Conference. We won 11 games, and then we played 11 games, and we won the Tangerine Bowl. So we were in Orlando, Florida, and that was the first year that Disney World or Disneyland, Disney World opened up in 1971. So I got a chance to go to Disney World. Been there several times since, but that was the first year we opened. Then, following that, our seasons were very mediocre for 6 years. I was at the University of Toledo, managed to get a master's degree in guidance and counseling education, Ministry of Education. Let's see. In the fall of 1976, the athletic director had a meeting with the football staff and said that if we won the game against our rivals, which was and still is today Bowling Green, he would go to bat to support us for 1 more year. Well, halftime we were up by 25 points. At the end of the game we lost by, 20 points, if you can imagine that. And so we knew that February 1st, 1977, our contracts would be up, but we were still employed up to that point. Now, during the 6 years, there was a person by the name of Jesse Bryan that was at the University of Toledo working on his doctorate degree. And coincidentally, he lived in the same apartment complex. We lived on the same floor. And he seemed to needed at the time to adopt a younger brother or something. And so guess who that was? Me. He, in addition to working on his doctorate degree or his PhD, he was also the director of the Outward Bound program. And so during my summer vacations, I worked with him for 1 summer, because I did that job for 2 summers. So I worked with him 1 summer because I taught phys ed for the Upward Bound program. But not only was that experience good for me, it introduced me to disadvantaged programs. And so I kind of fell in love with those students, and that helped me decide what kind of master's degree I wanted to earn at the University of Toledo, because I was going back and forth between counseling and phys ed, so I'm glad I decided on counseling. And so Dr. Bryan eventually left the University of Toledo before he finished up his PhD, and he got the job here at Bloomsburg University as the director of the Act 101 program. Called me up and asked me if I wanted to work for him during the summer. Now, understand, I got 4 weeks off in the summer. You know, I was going to school, working on my master's degree. Well, when he called me up, it was in 1974, I just earned my master's degree. And it took me 2 years. Fortunately, University of Toledo was on the quarter system. And so for 2 quarters, I had to work, couldn't go to school. So summer and spring, I could take classes, and I worked out arrangements with the professors that I would take the class, and they would hold the grade until I could use the credits that I was allowed from the university to pay for the course. But there was one big challenge, and that challenge was I had to make sure that the professors were still alive. Because if anything had happened to them, I would not have gotten the credit for the courses that I had taken under them and did not register for. So all that worked very well. Now, after the Bowling Green game, we all knew that we were fired. So that game took place early in November, before Thanksgiving at some point. And honest to God, 2 weeks later, I get a call from Jesse Bryan. And he asked me if I was interested in working full-time for him as the assistant director, because I had come here in 1975 and 1976, and I worked as a counselor, and I worked out of the counseling center for the Act 101 program. Now, Jesse's summer program ran for 6 weeks. I was only able to work for 4 weeks because I had a 4-week vacation. And Jesse worked everything out for me, worked out beautifully. And then, of course, in 1976,